we tend to have a view of refugee camps as just a series of tents, and they're not. I mean, if you go to Ramallah, I mean there's like fully fledged buildings there. It's not. I mean, they're not particularly luxurious. It has to be said, but there are different kinds of refugee camp. Tim, can you be in any way optimistic about the future for Palestine, for Israel?
No, I can't. It's not my place to be, and I wouldn't know how to begin. But I would like to pick up on the point about the shifting diplomacy. I think that Britain's position was initially framed, of course, by the horrors of October the 7th. There was just a feeling that one had to rally around Israel, and it had a right and an obligation to restore its security and get its people back. That changed because of shifting circumstance. But there was also that rallying around on both left and right because Britain is, as an establishment, pro-Israel. It just is. In being so, it is actually out of touch with public opinion on this. And as I say that again, as someone on the right who is broadly sympathetic towards Israel, I've just become very conscious in the last few weeks that the centre-right keeps saying, as if it's a Brexit or a culture war type issue, the people would be on the side of Israel. No, the public is overwhelmingly on the side of a ceasefire and sympathetic towards the Palestinian position. And I think that leaders in both parties, but particularly Labour, have actually found themselves out of step with the grassroots. Labour might have thought it could triangulate a bit on this, that it could create some distance with itself from Corbyn. It could take a position that would be in stark contrast to what came before, and by so doing win a lot of moderate voters over. I don't think that's going to be the case, because actually this has probably turned out to be the one issue where the Labour grassroots and the bulk of Labour MPs have actually been still Corbynite in instinct, rather than taking Starmer's position. So I think he's actually been out of touch with them on that. And a final point, people keep laughing at things like Queers for Palestine, because it sounds like chickens voting for foxes. But you have to understand, for a lot of younger people who have no sensitivity to how vile Hamas is, and perhaps no sensitivity to the realities of religious belief either, they see Israel-Gaza as a civil rights issue. And so they bracket the rights of Palestinians along with the rights of gays, lesbians and trans people and black people the world over. From a young person's perspective, this has all been a giant civil rights struggle like Martin Luther King Jr. I think that's where I think they're wrong and where my sympathy shifts much towards Israel, because I think, no, these are religious fruitcakes and they would wipe out all Jews if they could. But that's why you see things like Queers for Palestine and why you see young people apparently siding with something they don't really understand, because they see it very different from the way the older establishment does. It's a civil rights issue for them. Whereas the older establishment just sees it in pure, crude
why have we got Ukraine fatigue, which is just as appalling in many ways, and where the suffering has been terrible, and yet everyone seems to have forgotten about it, and it's impossible to get hosts anymore, and Ukrainians feel very forgotten. Why is it that this issue is so particularly toxic?
Because the media now ignores Ukraine. And I'd like to think this programme is an honourable exception, but we could do more. But when do you hear a discussion on Ukraine anywhere in the media nowadays? You just don't. So
there's also residual anti-Semitism, let's be honest. So the last week we've been discussing China's influence on the British government. Well, I don't see thousands of people out there campaigning against this. It's not something the far left particularly worries about, but it's actual, provable, quantifiable interference in our politics by a foreign government.
We have a question on this.
By contrast, Israel, there is an assumption, people are obsessed with the idea that Israel dominates global politics, calls all the shots, tells Western governments what to do, when there's zero proof for it. And Israel has very often found itself isolated by governments and is being isolated right now.
Well, it's being isolated, I would say, predominantly of its own volition, because yet again, Israel did adopt the moral high ground, had the moral high ground, and I'm afraid has frittered it all away. Because of the actions of its Prime Minister.
Well, Netanyahu.
On Ukraine, I would argue that perhaps we haven't been talking so much about it because, in a way, it seems a much simpler conflict that we are on the side of Ukraine. But
we're not demonstrating, are we? We're not out in the streets. We're not surrounding the Russian embassy. Why not?
No, but with Israel and Gaza, there's the conflict, within ourselves, within our society, whereas there isn't the conflict about Ukraine.
I see what you mean.